Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Thomas Michael and today's session is SAP Asset Accounting, how to reopen the fiscal year. We're at the beginning of the new year and I'm sure most of you are going through the year-end close right now. So inevitably the question then comes up, what happens if we have to reopen the year? And that's what I'll show you in today's session. This is going to be a pretty short session, about 20 minutes or so we have plenty of time to answer any questions you might have. My name is Thomas Michael. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO of the Michael Management Corporation. I've been in the SAP world for over 20 years. I've always been a SAP Asset Accounting consultant. That has always been my specialty over the last 2 decades. I write a lot and I speak a lot at national conferences, so if you ever see me speak anywhere, by all means come up, say hi, love to meet you. Or here's also my email address. You can always send me an email and I'll always try to give you my 2 cents on whatever questions you might have. All right, so what are we getting out of this session? Again, it's going to be a short session, 20 minutes or so. I'll give you a quick overview of the year-end closing process and really the importance of it in the bigger scheme. And then I'll go right into reopening the fiscal year. There's 2 ways to do this, and I'll show you both. One is to reopen the year for the entire company code, and the other one is to reopen the year by selected depreciation areas. And then, of course, what most people forget, once you open the year, the question is, well, how do you close it then again? So I'll talk about that too. And then we'll do a quick summary and we're done. So let's start with a quick overview of the year-end closing process. Now, again, we're at the beginning of the fiscal year for most of you guys. So you're either going through it right now, or maybe, well, today's the 4th, so maybe you already closed it or you're about to close the fiscal year. And maybe some of you are in a situation where you're considering skipping that whole year-end close because in reality, SAP does not force you to close the fiscal year in asset accounting. You could theoretically skip this year-end close. Now, that's a terrible idea, so don't do that. And the reason is right here. So if you decide to skip or maybe improperly close the fiscal year, you set yourself up for these 4 common errors. The first one, most common and almost guaranteed to happen if you do that, reconciliation problems. So your subledger in asset accounting will suddenly not reconcile to the general ledger anymore. All right, so that's a reconciliation problem between these 2 ledgers. And if you are a publicly traded company, you now just created a SOX non-compliance issue. So that's a very, very bad thing. Your compliance office is not going to like that, and neither will your auditors if that comes out. So that's a terrible situation to be in. And then also what happens is if you don't close the year in asset accounting and you open up the next year, that means now you have 2 years open, all right, 2017 and 2018. And each time you touch an asset in change mode, even if you just change a description on it or a cost center or anything, every time you save the asset master record, the system automatically performs a recalculation of values for that asset. And it does that for all open fiscal years, meaning it just recalculated values for 2017. And the result could be that it finds different values, different depreciation amounts, for example. Maybe the rounding rules have changed and now suddenly it wants to post an extra 60 cents of depreciation. The problem is you can't post that anywhere because the GL for last year is closed. So that's a big, bad problem to have. Right? And then ultimately, if you keep ignoring issues like these, the reconciliation issues and the recalc issues, and force the year to roll, you can set yourself up for data inconsistencies where the values in tables just don't match anymore, or worst case scenario, total utter data loss. So we've had several clients where that actually occurred, where all of their posted depreciation suddenly was gone in asset accounting. So that took a very long time to restore and fix. So that's something you want to avoid at all costs, obviously. So skipping or not really closing a year, or you think you close it, but there were still some errors and you just ignore that, terrible idea. You set yourself up for these serious problems. Also, like I said, the system does not force you to close the fiscal year in asset accounting. You just need to open up the new fiscal year, but you don't really have to close the old fiscal year. So if you did that, then you would have 2 fiscal years open. Again, not a great idea, not a situation you want to be in for a long period of time. And most importantly, you will not be able to open up the next fiscal year. So that would look like this. So we're right at the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. So if you were to skip the closing now for these 2 years, all right, so you leave 2017 open and you open up 2018. Now in 12 months from now, when you try to open up 2019, the system will give you a hard error message saying, I can't do that. You cannot open up this fiscal year because 2017 is still open and you can't have more than 2 fiscal years open at a time in asset accounting. All right, so I hope that makes sense, and I hope that that points out how important it is to really button up the year. So again, you guys are probably going through the close right now, and the closing process in itself is a long, drawn-out process. And so you finally get to this point where you close the fiscal year. So naturally, people ask, why in the hell would I want to reopen this? I just went through weeks and weeks of closing steps, and I'm finally done. So there's 2 scenarios why it is necessary to reopen the fiscal year. The first scenario is typically right now, very shortly after you close the fiscal year, right? So you close the year and then you're about to pop the champagne corks, and then somebody comes up, says, oh, hold up, there's a late invoice that we need to post, or we forgot to do the settlement, so we have to repeat the settlements, or there's an asset transaction, there's one asset needs to be retired and it really needs to come off the books, and we didn't get to it just yet. So those are very common scenarios that happen literally every year, where you close the year and then something happens that still needs to be recorded, so you need to open up the fiscal year for that. And that, should happen all this week, basically. The other scenario is long after you close the fiscal year. So this week you close the fiscal year, and maybe 6 months down the line, you suddenly hear from the tax department and they say, you know what, we just went through an audit. We need to post some tax adjustments into last fiscal year. So in that case, you also have to open up the fiscal year, but you don't want to open up the year for financial books. You want to do it for tax books. Okay. Both of these scenarios are easily handled by SAP, and there's 2 transactions for this, and I'll show you the 2 now. So let's do the first one. So reopening the fiscal year by company code. There's a transaction for this. Here's a little screenshot. The transaction code is OAAQ. And then you go right in here. And this allows you to open up the fiscal year for the entire company code. So this is the one that you want to use shortly after you close the fiscal year, right? So if somebody comes in and says, oh, there's a late invoice we need to post, or we forgot to retire this one asset, you want to do this for all depreciation areas in the company code. So you use this transaction to open up the year. And opening the year is actually really easy. All you do is you go in here, you pick your company code, and you type in what you want the last closed fiscal year to be. And you can go back as far as you want to. So you simply type that in right here. And again, this is for all depreciation areas. And you have to remember, this is asset accounting only. So this has nothing to do with the fiscal year in the financial accounting area, in the general ledger. All right, so you're just opening up the year in asset accounting, and if you want to post something, you need to separately make sure that the FI fiscal year is also open, right? The posting periods. Okay, so this is how you open up the year for the entire company code. Now let's do the other scenario where you open up the fiscal year by depreciation area. So this is the situation where 6 months down the line, you hear from the tax department and they suddenly need to post adjustments just to the tax depreciation areas without any impact to the financial books. There's a different transaction for this. It's called OAAR. Here's a screenshot of it. And what you do here is you pick your company code first, and then it shows you a list of all the depreciation areas and what the last closed fiscal year for each area is. And then simply type in what you want the year to be by depreciation area in order to open up those areas only. Okay. So one thing to remember here, and this is a limitation that you need to be aware of, here you cannot go back as far as you want to by area because the difference between depreciation areas cannot be greater than 1 year. Okay, so if the last closed fiscal year in your financial area is 2017, all right, you just closed the book, you can only open up to 2016 in the tax areas, meaning that 2016 is the last closed fiscal year. So for tax now 2017 is open and you can make adjustment postings. You couldn't go back any further. So if the tax guys suddenly come to you and say, you know what, we need to make adjustment postings for 2016 or even 2015, that can't be done with this transaction unless you open up the financial book areas too. And that's obviously something you definitely don't want to do. So what you really need in those scenarios is a custom consulting solution that allows you to go back 2 years or more. All right, so does this make sense so far? Those are the two ways to open up the fiscal year in asset accounting and to get adjustment postings or any kind of last-minute transactions into the system. So if you don't have any questions on this, then let's talk about what happens after you open the fiscal year. All right, so you open the year, you do your adjustment postings, you do whatever you have to do that caused you to open up these years to begin with. And now the question is, well, how do I close the year again? All right. So neither OAAQ nor OAAR can be used to close the fiscal year. So you can't roll forward the year with these transactions. You can only go back. All right, so you can only use them to open the year, but you can't use them to close the year going forward. For that, what you really need to do is you need to go through your year-end closing process again. The entire closing process is a 12-step process. It might even be 15 steps, depending on what functionality you guys use. And you'll have to go through those steps again. Maybe not every step, because it depends on, did you open up area 1 or not, or was it just the tax areas? So some of the steps might not apply if you only open up the tax areas. But the point is, you'll need to go through your year-end closing process, step by step, and decide, does this step apply now? Do I have to perform it? Yes or no? And at the very least, you have to run transaction AJAB, to close the year, right? That's the transaction that actually closes the year in asset accounting. Now, the important thing that I want to mention here is if there are any errors reported by any of your steps, closing steps, you really need to correct these errors. You can't just skip them or ignore them or try to force a year-end close. That's going to come back and bite you in the behind. So if there are any issues where the system says I can't calculate depreciation for an asset or depreciation hasn't been completely posted, you need to fix and address those issues first before running that AJAB transaction. All right, so that gets us to the end. So if you guys have any questions, now is the time to ask them. Quick summary. So opening up the fiscal year in asset accounting is easy, as we've seen. There's 2 transactions. All you have to do is literally type in the last closed fiscal year that you want, and you open the year. So it's very easy, but closing the year is not, right? You can't use these transactions to close the year. No. Remember that you can open the fiscal year in asset accounting for the entire company code or for just selected depreciation areas without impact to the financial book area. 2 very important distinctions. And again, to close the year, the only way you can close it is by going through your regular year-end closing steps and ultimately running that transaction AJAB to close the year. And then finally, if there are any asset errors, don't skip over them, don't ignore them. You have to fix those before they become major issues. That's the other thing, right? When one of these errors pops up, that's a good time to fix them because now it's still possible to fix them because the year's open. Right? If you ignore them and wait until the year is closed and then you think, maybe in 3 months when I have time, I'll look at it. Well, now it's a major issue. You can't fix it anymore because the financial accounting year is closed. So that's why fix them now when they happen, when you see them, and you avoid any major issues in the past, in the future. Now, see, I got a question here. Do these steps still apply in S/4HANA? Yes, Louis. The concept is still the same, right? No matter what release you're in, you still need to have a year-end closing process, right? Doesn't matter if you're on HANA or S4 or ECC, because it's not just about the closing process itself, and we just had a session about it a couple of weeks ago, is a 13-step process with many other steps other than actually opening or closing the fiscal year. What other? Can you please repeat the transaction codes? Yes, absolutely. There's 2. Let me go back real quick. So the 2 transaction codes are OAAQ, that's the one that opens up the fiscal year for the entire company code, and the other one is OAAR, that's the one that allows you to open up the fiscal year by selected depreciation areas. All right, any other questions? Good. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was useful. If you can think of a question later on after we hang up, here's my email address again. By all means, feel free to send me your questions. I'll try my best to answer them. And with that, I thank you for joining. I hope I see you at one of our next webinars, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.